You know how First Contact is supposed to work in all those movies? Peaceful aliens show up. There's some translation issues, maybe a misunderstanding or two, but eventually everyone shakes hands and joins a galactic community. Well, that's not what happened to us. Not even close. Picture this. It's Tuesday morning, and radio telescopes around the world are picking up something that makes every scientist's coffee go cold. These aren't random space noises or pulsars doing their usual thing. These are organized signals, mathematical sequences that scream intelligence. Within hours, every major government on Earth knows we're not alone anymore. The signals were coming from beyond our solar system, and they were getting stronger. Not closer, just clearer, like someone was fine-tuning their broadcast specifically for us. The math was beautiful, elegant even. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, basic physics constants. It was a universal language every scientist had dreamed about since we first looked up at the stars. What we didn't know was that out there in the void, the Galactic Council had been watching us for decades. They'd heard our radio shows from the 1950s, picked up our satellite chatter, even caught some of our early internet traffic. To them, we were just another primitive species taking baby steps toward real civilization. The Council had this whole thing down to science. They'd done successful first contact with over 300 different species across the galaxy. Each time, same playbook. Send a diplomatic vessel, broadcast mathematical peace treaties, make contact with the most advanced civilization on the planet, and gradually introduce them to galactic society. It worked every single time. So when Earth started broadcasting more sophisticated signals back in response to their mathematical messages, they figured we were ready for the next step. The Council selected their most experienced diplomatic team, loaded them onto the Harmony's Dream, and sent them our way with all the standard first contact protocols. Captain Veltar had overseen 12 successful first contacts. His communication officer had cracked the language barriers for species that communicated through color changes and chemical releases. Their xenobiologist understood more about carbon-based life than most species understood about themselves. These weren't rookies. They were the best the galaxy had to offer. The Harmony's Dream spent 3 weeks traveling to Earth, broadcasting peace messages the whole way. Mathematical proofs that they came in friendship, universal constants that showed their understanding of physics, even basic pictograms showing their peaceful intentions. By the time they reached our solar system, they transmitted enough information to fill entire libraries. But space has a twisted sense of humor, and Murphy's Law applies even in interstellar diplomacy. The ship's artificial intelligence, a system that had worked flawlessly for over 2 centuries, picked the worst possible moment to malfunction, just as they were entering Earth's atmosphere, preparing for their careful, controlled descent to what they'd identified as the least militaristic landing zone in the Pacific Ocean. Everything went wrong. The navigation system crashed. Life support started failing. The ship that was supposed to gently lower itself into Earth's atmosphere, like a feather, instead turned into a screaming meteor, burning up as it plummeted toward the ocean. What should have been humanity's greatest moment became a fireball, lighting up the night sky over half the Pacific Rim. Every alien diplomat aboard died instantly when the ship hit the water at terminal velocity. Decades of planning, the galaxy's most experienced first contact team, and our species' introduction to galactic civilization all ended in a spectacular crash that lit up satellite feeds around the world. Our governments panicked, and honestly, who could blame them? For months, we've been getting these weird mathematical signals from space. Observatories worldwide had been tracking something big approaching Earth. And now this massive object had just crashed into the ocean with the force of a small nuclear bomb. Was this an invasion that went wrong? Was it some kind of weapon? Were there more ships coming? Within 6 hours of impact, naval forces from 4 different countries were racing toward the crash site. Within 12 hours, salvage operations were underway. Within 24 hours, every piece of alien technology that could be recovered was on its way to the most secret facilities each government could manage. The cover-up was immediate and total. Official reports called it a meteor strike. Satellite footage got classified. Witnesses were debriefed and sworn to secrecy. The few pieces of wreckage that made it to civilian researchers were dismissed as unusual mineral formations caused by the intense heat of atmospheric entry. But in those black sites and underground facilities, human scientists were getting their first look at technology that was centuries ahead of anything we'd ever dreamed of. And slowly, carefully, they started to figure out that we'd just become the galaxy's biggest first contact failure. The Galactic Council was horrified. They'd just lost their entire diplomatic mission to what looked like violent primitives who shot first and asked questions never. From their perspective, they'd sent a peaceful mission to welcome a new species, and humanity had somehow managed to kill everyone aboard. So they did what any reasonable galactic authority would do when faced with a species that seemed too dangerous for civilization. They wrote us off completely, slammed a quarantine around our entire solar system, and marked Earth as a failed species that was too primitive and too violent to ever join galactic society. Automated defense platforms went up at the edge of our solar system. Warning beacons started broadcasting in every known galactic language, telling any ship that approached to stay away from the dangerous species that lived on the third planet from Sol. And that's how humanity's first contact became humanity's last contact, at least as far as the galaxy was concerned. They thought they'd solved the problem by locking us away. They had no idea they'd just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. 50 years. That's how long the galaxy forgot about us while we did something they never expected. We got to work. Think about it for a moment. For half a century, while alien automated platforms circled our solar system like cosmic prison guards, humanity was supposed to just sit there and accept our fate. We were meant to stay put, maybe eventually fade away, definitely never cause trouble again. The Galactic Council had written us off as too primitive and too dangerous. Case closed. But here's the thing about humans that the galaxy was about to learn the hard way. Tell us we can't do something, and we'll move mountains to prove you wrong. Those first few years after the crash were chaotic. Every major power on Earth had pieces of alien wreckage, and everyone was trying to figure out what they had. The technology was so far beyond anything we understood that most of it looked like fancy metal sculptures. Scientists were poking at materials that could bend light, running electrical current through circuits that seemed to exist in more dimensions than we had names for. Then Dr. Blake Morrison changed everything. Morrison wasn't some big-shot professor at a fancy university. He was a mid-level researcher at a government facility in Nevada, the kind of guy who fixed coffee machines when he wasn't trying to crack alien computer systems. But Blake had something special. He approached problems like a 5-year-old with unlimited curiosity and the patience of a monk. While everyone else was trying to understand how the alien technology worked, Blake was asking a different question. What information was stored on these systems? He spent 18 months just trying to power up a single device that looked like a crystalline tablet. When he finally got it working, what he found made him call in sick for 3 days straight. Star charts. Hundreds of them. Not just random dots in space, but detailed maps showing inhabited worlds, trade routes, resource deposits, and communication networks spanning half the galaxy. Each chart was labeled with symbols that took another year to decode. But when Blake finally cracked the alien navigation language, humanity suddenly knew exactly where we stood in the cosmic neighborhood. We weren't alone. We weren't even close to alone. The galaxy was teeming with life. Entire civilizations that had been talking to each other for thousands of years. And every single one of them was now off limits to us because of one tragic accident. The revelation hit Earth's governments like a cold bucket of reality. For the first time in human history, every nation on the planet had something bigger to worry about than their neighbors. Russia and America stopped arguing about missile treaties and started sharing alien technology research. China and India put their border disputes on hold to work on faster-than-light communication systems. Even smaller nations that had been locked out of space programs suddenly found themselves with crucial pieces of the puzzle. Project Exodus started as a crazy idea in a Pentagon basement. What if we didn't accept the quarantine? What if we found a way around it? The alien star chart showed us exactly where to go, and the recovered technology was giving us clues about how to get there. The challenge was massive. We needed to build ships that could carry thousands of people across interstellar distances. We needed life support systems that could work for decades. Most importantly, we needed stealth technology that could slip past alien sensors that were centuries ahead of our best detection equipment. It took 20 years of secret development spread across dozens of countries. Engineers in Brazil worked on hull materials, while physicists in Japan cracked faster-than-light navigation. Agricultural scientists in Kenya designed closed-loop farming systems, while psychologists in Canada figured out how to keep people sane during multi-decade journeys. The breakthrough came from studying how the alien stealth systems had almost worked during their crash. The Harmony's dream had been trying to mask its approach, but the system failure had revealed how their invisibility technology operated. Human engineers reverse-engineered not just how it worked, but how to make it work better. Tyler Hayes was the obvious choice to command the first wave. The guy had been a Navy test pilot before becoming an astronaut, then spent 15 years helping design the new generation ships. More importantly, Hayes had that particular combination of careful planning and complete fearlessness that you need when you're about to attempt the impossible. The first 6 ships were monsters. Each one was 3 times larger than anything humans had ever built, designed to carry 2,000 colonists along with everything needed to start civilization from scratch on alien worlds. They had manufacturing facilities, genetic storage for Earth plants and animals, entire libraries of human knowledge, and most importantly, the determination of people who refused to accept that humanity's story ended with a quarantine. Launch day was kept secret from everyone except the essential personnel. No media coverage, no public announcements, no fanfare. Just 6 massive ships slipping away from Earth in the dead of night, their stealth systems making them invisible to both human and alien sensors. As Tyler Hayes watched Earth shrink behind them, he knew they were carrying something more dangerous than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. Human stubbornness and our absolute refusal to stay down when someone tells us we don't belong. The galaxy thought they had us contained. They were about to discover that caging humans doesn't make us weaker. It just makes us more determined to prove them wrong. Here's where it gets interesting. The Council hadn't just quarantined us. They'd accidentally pointed us toward exactly the right planets. You have to understand how the galaxy worked back then. For thousands of years, alien civilizations have been expanding across space, but they only went to the nice neighborhoods. Perfect atmospheric pressure, comfortable temperatures, plenty of water, maybe some pretty sunsets. They were like cosmic tourists who only stayed at 5-star hotels. All those star charts that Dr. Blake Morrison had decoded showed 2 types of worlds. First were the inhabited planets, where civilized galactic citizens lived their comfortable lives. Second were what the aliens called buffer zones, planets so hostile, so dangerous, so absolutely impossible that they serve as natural barriers between different galactic territories. These weren't just difficult worlds. We're talking about planets that would kill most galactic species just by existing on them. World with atmospheric pressure that would crush a spaceship, temperatures that would melt steel, radiation levels that would fry electronics, and weather patterns that made Earth's worst hurricanes look like gentle spring breezes. The aliens had marked these worlds as permanently uninhabitable, not just difficult to colonize, but actually impossible for any intelligent life to survive on. They were so sure of this that they didn't even bother putting monitoring stations around these death traps. Why would you watch a graveyard? But here's the thing about humans that the galaxy was about to learn the hard way. We specialize in impossible. Madison Torres was the first to prove it. When her colony ship reached Kepler, 442b, her crew took one look at the volcanic hellscape waiting for them and started making jokes about Earth's Hawaiian Islands. This planet didn't just have active volcanoes. It had a surface that was basically one giant lava lamp. The ground temperature averaged 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Volcanic eruptions happened daily, and the atmosphere was thick with sulfur compounds that would eat through most building materials. Any sane species would have taken one look and headed for the nearest exit. Madison's people started unpacking. The breakthrough came when their geologist, a guy named Pete Williams, realized they were looking at the problem backwards. Instead of trying to survive despite the volcanic activity, why not use it? Within 6 months, Madison's team had built the galaxy's first geothermal cities, massive underground complexes that used the planet's fury to generate unlimited clean energy. They weren't just surviving on Kepler. For 42b, they were thriving. The volcanic activity that should have killed them became their greatest resource. Lava flows were redirected to power massive generators. Sulfur compounds were processed into building materials stronger than anything Earth had ever produced. The constant geological activity was harnessed to run manufacturing systems that worked around the clock. Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Commander Finn McGrath's team was dealing with a completely different kind of impossible. Proxima B was tidally locked, meaning one side faced its star in eternal burning day, while the other side was trapped in frozen night. The temperature difference was so extreme that most materials would shatter just from thermal stress. The day side reached over 1,000 degrees, while the night side was colder than liquid nitrogen. Previous galactic surveys had written off as completely uninhabitable. The narrow twilight zone between eternal day and night was supposedly too unstable to support any kind of permanent settlement. Finn's people didn't just settle in that twilight zone. They turned it into paradise. They built mobile cities that slowly move around the planet, staying in that perfect temperature band where day met night. These weren't just survival shelters. They were thriving communities with parks, schools, and manufacturing centers. The extreme temperature differences on either side became their power source, running massive thermal generators that produced more energy than they could use. But the colonists didn't stop there. They started deliberately moving into more extreme zones, building specialized habitats that could withstand the burning day and the frozen night. Within 5 years, they had settlements across the entire planet, each one perfectly adapted to its specific environment. The dayside colonies became manufacturing centers where the intense heat was used for metalworking that couldn't be done anywhere else in the galaxy. The nightside settlements became research facilities where the extreme cold allowed for experiments in quantum physics that required near absolute zero temperatures. But the real masterpiece was Clive Patterson's work on Titan VII. This wasn't just a hostile world. It was actively trying to kill everything that came near it. The entire moon was bathed in gamma radiation from its parent planet's decaying magnetic field. Radiation levels were so high that they would cook any known organic life in minutes. Even the aliens' best shielding technology couldn't protect against this kind of constant bombardment. Clive's colonists should have died within hours of landing. Instead, they discovered something that revolutionized the galaxy's understanding of life itself. The moon wasn't empty. It was covered in silicon-based organisms that didn't just survive the radiation, they literally fed on it. These weren't simple microbes. They were complex life forms that had evolved to turn gamma radiation into food the way Earth plants use sunlight for photosynthesis. Instead of fighting the radiation, Clive's people formed partnerships with these organisms. They developed symbiotic relationships where humans provided protection and resources while the silicon-based life forms shared their radiation processing abilities. Within 3 years, Titan VII had become the most energy-rich colony in human space. The radiation that should have been a death sentence was converted into unlimited power. The colony wasn't just self-sufficient. It was generating enough excess energy to power entire fleets of starships. Each colony became proof of something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that didn't just adapt to hostile environments, but turned them into advantages. We weren't surviving on impossible worlds. We were making them better than the paradise planets the aliens preferred. The galaxy had accidentally shown us exactly where we belonged, in places too tough for anyone else to handle. And we were about to turn those death traps into the foundations of an empire. The Council survey started picking up impossible energy readings from their dead zones. At first, they figured their instruments were malfunctioning. Uninhabitable worlds don't suddenly start generating massive power signatures. Picture the scene in the Galactic Council's monitoring station on Centauri Prime. It's been 50 years since they quarantined Earth. 50 years of automated systems dutifully scanning the galaxy's buffer zones to make sure nothing dangerous was stirring in the cosmic wastelands. These surveys were routine maintenance, like checking smoke detectors in an empty building. Then the readings started coming in. Kepler 442b, the volcanic nightmare that registered surface temperatures hot enough to melt copper, was suddenly showing energy signatures equivalent to a major industrial civilization. Not just any civilization either, but one producing more power than most core worlds manage with their fusion plants and solar collectors. The technician monitoring the feed, a methodical alien named Zexhai, ran the diagnostics 3 times. Equipment malfunction. Had to be. Dead worlds don't suddenly develop energy signatures that make inhabited planets look dim by comparison. But the readings kept coming. Proxima b, the tidally locked wasteland, was showing not just energy production, but organized movement patterns across its surface. Titan 7, the radiation-soaked moon that killed everything that came near it, was broadcasting power levels that shouldn't have been possible even with the galaxy's most advanced technology. When Zexhai brought the anomalies to his supervisor, the response was predictably bureaucratic. File a maintenance request for the sensor arrays. Schedule a diagnostic team. These buffer zone worlds have been dead for millions of years. They'd stay dead for millions more. But the readings didn't stop. They got stronger. Within weeks, similar reports were flooding in from monitoring stations across the galaxy. Dead zones that had been silent since the dawn of galactic civilization were suddenly blazing with energy signatures. Not random energy either, but organized, purposeful power generation that suggested advanced technology and large populations. The Galactic Council's response was swift and thorough. If their monitoring equipment was failing on this scale, they needed to know why. Investigation fleets were dispatched to a dozen different buffer zones with orders to identify and repair whatever was causing these impossible readings. Then the investigation ships arrived, and everything the galaxy thought they knew about possible went out the airlock. Commander Telvas of the Research Vessel Scientific Inquiry was the first to confirm what nobody wanted to believe. As his ship approached Kepler, 442b, expecting to find empty volcanic wasteland, his sensors detected something that made him order 3 different crew members to verify the readings independently. Cities. Massive, sprawling cities built directly into the volcanic landscape, with populations in the hundreds of thousands. Energy collectors that turn lava flows into power sources. Manufacturing complexes that use the planet's geological fury to forge materials a species had never seen before. Those dead, worlds were alive with human cities, thriving populations that had turned each hellscape into home. The discovery sent shockwaves through every council chamber from the core worlds to the outer rim. The initial reports were dismissed as sensor errors, crew hallucinations, maybe equipment contamination from hostile environments. But report after report confirmed the same impossible truth. Humans had not only survived on worlds that should have killed them, they were flourishing in environments that would destroy other galactic species just by existing there. Emergency sessions were called as the reports kept flooding in. Each investigation team brought back evidence that challenged everything the galaxy understood about habitable worlds and the limits of biological adaptation. Humans weren't just surviving on these death-trap planets. They were turning them into powerhouses that outproduced most established galactic colonies. They were terraforming planets through controlled volcanic eruptions, literally reshaping worlds by harnessing forces that other species fled from. They were farming an acid rain that would dissolve most known materials, growing food in conditions that would sterilize any other agricultural system. Most shocking of all, they were building cities that literally moved across planetary surfaces to follow optimal conditions. Entire urban centers that could relocate themselves as needed, adapting to environmental changes that would force other species to abandon entire worlds. Ashley Crawford's atmospheric processors on Wolf 359 were harvesting storm systems that would strip the atmosphere off any other inhabited world. Her installations weren't just surviving storms that generated winds over 500 miles per hour. They were using those storms as power sources. Weather patterns that represented planetary-scale disasters for most species had become Ashley's industrial infrastructure. Derek Walsh's deep-core mining operations on HD 85512b were extracting resources from pressures that would crush any known starship. His crews were working in conditions equivalent to the bottom of gas giant atmospheres, places where the pressure alone would compress most materials into exotic matter. But Derek's people had adapted their equipment and techniques to not just survive, but thrive in pressures that redefined the limits of engineering. The Council faced something they'd never encountered in their millennia of expansion across the galaxy. Here was a species that could colonize worlds they couldn't even visit, claiming territory they'd never dreamed of wanting. Every impossible world that the galaxy had written off as permanently uninhabitable was potentially valuable real estate in human hands. Every buffer zone that separated galactic territories could become a human stronghold. Every environmental challenge that limited galactic expansion had become a human opportunity. The quarantine that was supposed to contain a dangerous primitive species had accidentally created something far more threatening than the Council had ever imagined. They created a civilization that could thrive anywhere, and that changed everything. When the Galactic Council finally worked up the nerve for round 2 of First Contact, they discovered something that turned their entire understanding of power upside down. Imagine being the most powerful organization in the galaxy for thousands of years, then suddenly realizing you've accidentally created your own competition. That's exactly what happened to the Galactic Council when they finally admitted they had a human problem that wasn't going away. The emergency meetings went on for months. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to discuss what they were calling the human situation. For the first time in galactic history, the Council was dealing with a species that hadn't asked for permission to expand, hadn't followed their rules, and definitely hadn't stayed in the neat little box they'd been assigned. Humanity now controlled dozens of strategic worlds throughout the galaxy's most unreachable territories. These weren't random planets we'd stumbled onto by accident. Every world we colonized was located exactly where the galaxy needed access most. Buffer zones that had separated hostile alien territories were now human strongholds. Resource-rich worlds that had been written off as too dangerous to mine were flying human flags and shipping materials across space. We commanded hybrid technology that merged their science with human innovation in ways they'd never imagined possible. Remember, we'd spent 50 years reverse engineering their crash ship, but we hadn't just copied their technology. We'd improved it, adapted it, and combined it with human engineering in ways that created entirely new possibilities. Our stealth systems were better than anything the galaxy had ever developed. Our power generation systems turned hostile environments into energy sources that made their best fusion reactors look like flashlights. Our manufacturing techniques could produce materials in conditions that would destroy their most advanced facilities. Most importantly, we'd become the only species capable of colonizing the frontier regions they'd always written off as impossible. Every world that was too hot, too cold, too radioactive, too pressurized, or too chemically hostile for galactic civilization was now potential human territory. The Council was facing a strategic nightmare. They'd spent millennia expanding across the galaxy's habitable worlds, but there were vast regions they'd never been able to access because of environmental barriers. Suddenly, humans controlled the keys to territories that contained resources, strategic positions, and living space beyond their wildest calculations. When they finally decided to make contact again, they approached very differently than they had 50 years earlier. No more diplomatic vessels broadcasting peace treaties. This time, they sent a formal request through communication channels, asking for permission to meet with human representatives. Admiral Poppy Harrison stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as it received the Council's new ambassadors, and the power dynamic was completely reversed from that first failed contact attempt. Poppy wasn't some primitive human leader, hoping for acceptance into galactic civilization. She was a commander of humanity's most advanced warship, representing a species that now controls some of the most valuable real estate in the galaxy. The Indomitable itself was a perfect example of what humans had become, a massive vessel built with hybrid technology, powered by systems that could operate in environments that would disable any other ship in the galaxy. When the Council's ambassadors came aboard, they weren't arriving as the representatives of a superior civilization graciously offering membership to primitives. They were arriving as politicians who needed something that only humans could provide. The negotiations were unlike anything in galactic history. This time, humanity wasn't a primitive species hoping for acceptance. We were partners offering something they desperately needed. The galaxy's most hostile frontiers had become our thriving neighborhoods. Every world they considered uninhabitable was now flying human flags and contributing to a growing human economy that operated in spaces the galaxy had never been able to access. The irony was perfect. The quarantine that was meant to contain us had accidentally made us indispensable. By forcing us to develop in isolation, by pushing us toward the galaxy's most challenging environments, the Council had created exactly the kind of civilization they now desperately needed as allies. Think about it from their perspective. They had territorial disputes with hostile alien species, but the buffer zones between civilizations were now controlled by humans who were friendly to nobody but strong enough to keep the peace. They had resource shortages because certain materials could only be found on worlds too dangerous for them to colonize, but humans were already mining those worlds and willing to trade. They had expansion problems because their species could only survive in narrow environmental ranges, but humans had proven that intelligent life could thrive almost anywhere. The Deathworlders they tried to forget had become the key to unlocking territories that represented the next phase of galactic expansion. We'd turned their rejection into the galaxy's greatest expansion opportunity, and now they needed us more than we needed them. Admiral Poppy Harrison's response to their request for alliance was diplomatic but firm. Humanity was interested in joining galactic civilization, but as equals, not as junior members grateful for acceptance. We brought unique capabilities to the table, controlled strategic territories they couldn't access, and had proven our ability to thrive independently. The final agreements established humanity as a major galactic power with full council representation and autonomous control over our frontier territories. The species that had been written off as too primitive and too dangerous had become one of the galaxy's most essential civilizations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so successful that your enemies have to beg you to be friends. And that's exactly what humanity accomplished, one impossible world at a time.